Hi, I'm Larry Puckett, the DCC guy. Well, as I promised last week, we're going to continue with our discussion of speed matching. And what I want to talk about today are these custom user-loadable 28 speed step speed curves. And we're going to go over those, and I'm going to tell you what they are, why you might want to use them, why you might not want to use them, and then we'll go over some examples using DecoderPro to show you how you go about creating them. But before we get started, I want to ask you one more time, hit that little red subscribe button, and when the little bell comes up, click on it and click all. Thanks now. Before we do move on, I want to get into the feedback topic for today, and that is periodically I get these snide posts in the comments from people who tell me, oh, we're 3 minutes into a video and he's still waffling on, or 5 minutes into a video and he's still talking. We're not seeing anything. Well, it gets down to the basic philosophy of how I go about doing videos. And my intention is to actually teach you something, not just to entertain you and show you my trains running on the tracks. There is a scroll button at the bottom of each video, or on your Roku device, there is a fast forward button. And that will allow you to just zip past my talking head part of the video and get to the part where you can actually see trains running, or whatever it is you're here to be entertained by. But I'm not about to change the way that I do my videos. I do this because I enjoy it. I enjoy, passing on some of the knowledge that I've gained over the past 30 years of working with DCC and over the past 40 years of model railroading, at least 40 years. And, when it stops being fun for me, I can just very easily walk away from it. So that's all I've got to say for feedback for today. First, I want to tell you what are these user-loadable custom speed tables that is the subject for today. Basically, what these are, they are as the name implies, a 28 speed step speed table. That's different from the 3-step speed tables that we looked at last week, where you're using CVs 2, 6, and 5 to create a 3-step or 3-point speed curve. Now, the thing about decoders is they actually interpolate between those 3 steps to get the full 28 and 128 speed steps, depending on what you've selected and set up your decoder to use. So you're not losing anything when you go to the 3 speed step speed curve. With the 28 speed step, it gives you much greater ability to control how your locomotive performs, because you can put in nice S-shaped curves, you can use exponential curves, you can stick with the straight line linear curves that you get basically from your 3-step speed curve. It just gives you that much greater ability to control how your locomotive responds to throttle commands. And that's basically why you would want to use these. Because if you have a very fast accelerating passenger locomotive, you can use a very fast speed curve. And I'll show you examples of that here using DecoderPro in a minute. If you have a freight locomotive that's pulling long drags, you can set that up so it just has a very slow increase in speed. And I'll show you an example of that in a minute as well. So it allows you to customize how individual locomotives respond in a way that you can't do using those 3-step speed curves that I talked about in last week's video. Now, there's several different ways that you can create these. So one way to do that is to use graph paper and create a graph of the speed curve that you want, and then simply interpolate from that graph the CV settings that would be required in order to give you that speed curve. Now, that's not the most straightforward way to do it, because you have to enter it by hand, and it's an iterative process in many cases, so it's cumbersome to do it that way. And to be honest with you, I've done it that way once in my life and, walked away from it. And to be honest with you, it's not all that useful when it comes to speed matching, because it takes quite a while to set these up, And consider the complexity involved, because instead of just working with 3 CV settings, you're working with 28 CV settings. So try to match up all 28 CV settings in 2 different locomotives can be a very frustrating experience as far as I'm concerned. So what I will show you today then is basically how you can do it to customize individual locomotives and not necessarily to speed match locomotives for a given consist. But I will show you at least one circumstance where you might want to use this, because there's something that is available on many decoders, and that's called the forward and reverse trim settings. And I'll show you the 2 CVs that you can use to set those. And I've got a number of locomotives, and I'm sure you do, that do not respond the same way in the forward direction as they do in the reverse. They'll go faster one way or the other. And the only way to deal with that are these forward and reverse trim settings. And they allow you to basically adjust the performance of your speed curves so that they will go the same speed forward and reverse. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to move over to my computer, and I'm going to show you using DecoderPro how to do these things. Okay, here we are in DecoderPro, and I've selected the speed table function in DecoderPro, and that's what this pane shows. So right off, I want to point out that this is for an Economy Eco plug-and-play decoder. And this display will change slightly depending on the type of decoder you're using, because different decoders have different options available to you with respect to speed curves. This is the basic setup, though, that you'll find for just about all of them, and so I'm going to use it to show you things in this video. Okay, so the first thing right here, you can see this dot that is dark that says Use Speed Table. So that means this speed table is going to be used for controlling the locomotive. Now, if you wanted to turn that off, you would go back to your basic speed control pane, and there's a setting for that. And as you can see here, it's CV29 bit 4 that is being set to control this. And then there are various other things here. We're going to use the 28 point custom speed table here. That's what this shows you. So we have all 28 speed steps available to be modified. And if you look here, you can see this is speed step 1, CV67, and up here, speed step 28, CV94. And these are the individual values that go into each CV for this straight line linear speed curve. So it starts out at 0 and goes up to 255. And at the midpoint, we're going to be somewhere in between, here 122. So one thing that you can do is you can actually manipulate this speed curve any way you want, as I'll show you in a minute, and then write down the values for the speed table for each one of the CVs, each of the 28 CVs, and then just input them into your locomotive decoder using your handheld throttle to program these CVs. That's more cumbersome than using DecoderPro, because there's a write function down at the bottom that I'm not showing you that allows you to write all of these values to your decoder. Okay, so what kind of modifications can we make? Well, obviously there's this force straight that gives you this linear speed curve. You can also manipulate it a bit, grabbing that and moving it up so you can see that everything is responding in relation to that. We can match the ends, so you can modify that speed curve by setting the ends wherever you want and then hitting the Match Ends button here. Another thing you can do in here, let's say you wanted this to be down, at around a value of 4. You can actually use the up and down arrow button on your computer to do this. So I've got it at 5, and let's put this one up here. We'll go up to, say, 240, okay? Now, I'm going to click in on these to lock them in place, and then we can match the ends, and we've got a straight line relationship between values of 5 and 240. So we've made a quick manipulation there. By locking in speed steps 1, 14, and 28, I can actually create my 3-step speed curve like we did last week, and I can just pull it up and down at the midpoint here to modify that speed curve. And I can do the same thing up here. As you can see, I can control the upper portion of the speed curve. I can control the lower portion of the speed curve. And of course, then the middle allows me to manipulate the whole curve here. So that allows you to very quickly experiment with different types of 3-point speed curves. I'm going to go back to our straight relationship here. So we got our straight linear curve. Now let's look at the constant ratio curve. So this is one where you can see it's slowly increasing in speed until we get up here to about the midpoint, and then things start to increase much more quickly. Now this would be something you would use for a drag freight, a locomotive that's pulling a very heavy, long coal train or freight train. It's very slow to accelerate until it overcomes the forces of gravity and momentum starts to kick in and it starts to roll on down the track. And then its speed can go ahead and pick up. Okay, so we've got our constant ratio curve. You can increase the upper end of it and click constant ratio again, and you're going to get that slow increase at the upper end. Okay, let's go back to our straight line relationship. Let's click these off, and we'll take a look at the log curves. Now these type of curves allow you to set up a locomotive that will accelerate quite quickly and then plateau out in the upper portion of the speed curve. So this would be something like a Pacific passenger locomotive that is going to be hauling passenger trains, and it's going to accelerate quickly out of the station and then hit a point where it's not going to accelerate very quickly at a given speed step. And it's going to basically plateau out. And a lot of steam locomotives that are not free steaming behave in this fashion. A free steaming locomotive is one that basically can keep accelerating as you keep opening the throttle, because they have an ability to produce a great amount of steam. You can also drop this down, as I showed you earlier, and do our curve again. So we have a much shallower increase in speed. Okay, let's go ahead and manipulate this a little bit. Let's pull this one down and hit our log curve, and you can see that it's a much shallower curve, nowhere near the acceleration rate that we had before. Another thing, you could keep manipulating this if you wish, and experimenting with different shapes. You can increase your lower end and see what that looks like. So you can make a lot of different changes, save them to your locomotive, run it down the track, because you can do this with ops mode programming and set it up on the track, write the curve change, and see if you like that. I use this mainly to customize the speed response of individual locomotives for my steam locomotive fleet, because I want my passenger locomotives to increase and accelerate speed quite rapidly out of a station. I would use this type of curve here with my large articulated Challenger locomotive, and is going to be moving much, much more slowly out of its yard or wherever its starting point is, and accelerate much slower. Another thing that you can do is experiment with this shift left and shift right, because you can do that just clicking that button. You can see on the left side there, it's shifting that one upward. We can bring this back down. Okay, and you can shift it to the right as well. So it's bringing it down. So that gives you some ways that you can manipulate this set of speed curves in here. And once you've done this, you can either go with, you can copy them down here. You can actually go into the CV listings and you can see those. And I'll show you that in a minute once you're finished playing with this. Okay, let's now take a look at these two values down here, the forward trim and the reverse trim. Okay, so the forward trim allows you to fine-tune forward voltage levels, and it goes into CV 66, and the reverse trim fine-tunes reverse voltage levels, and those values go into CV 95. So they bracket our 28 point custom speed table, which is CVs 67 through CV 94. The values for the forward trim and the reverse trim can be anything from 0 to 255. And if you enter a value of 0, then it totally disables the forward or the reverse trim feature. But you can then enter a value from 1 to 127, and that's going to multiply the forward drive voltage by a value of about 0.008 to 0.91. And if you enter a value of 129 to 255, it's going to multiply your forward voltage by 1.09 to 1.19. So that increases the forward voltage and speed. And so and those other values, 0.008 to 0.91, actually decrease your forward voltage by small amounts. So you can either increase it or decrease it. And of course, entering a value of 128 is going to also disable the forward trim. Now the same thing is true for your reverse trim. Entering a value of 0 or 128 is going to disable the trim feature, and entering a value of 1 to 127 will multiply the forward voltage by 0.008 to 0.91, and entering values from 129 to 255 is going to multiply the voltage by 1.09 to 1.91. So it allows you to increase or decrease the forward and the reverse voltages by those amounts, and allows you to adjust it so that you can get it to run the same speed in both directions. So that can be very helpful, and to my knowledge, this is the only way you can do that. You can't do it with your normal three-step speed curves. And that's why I say there's this situation where you can do your straight line relationships, and at speed step 14, if I can get it to come up, 13, 14 right here, we can alter it, create that three-step speed curve right here, and then use our forward and reverse trims to adjust it and tweak those forward and reverse speeds. So you can really narrow in on matching up those different locomotives. And it's much less complex than trying to actually speed match all 28 of these CVs. Now this is the CVs pane in DecoderPro, and within this you can go through and look at the values of all of your CVs that are currently stored in your computer about this decoder, and you can read them all and keep it up to date and do all of that. Now let's go down here to the CVs for these user loadable speed curves. Because one thing, as I said earlier, that you can do is you can go ahead and look at values for the CVs 66 through, I believe it was 95 here, yes. You can see we edited these values here, 67 through 94, and you can actually just write down the individual values for each speed step in the curve, and then use your handheld throttle to program those into your decoder if you do not have the interface for using DecoderPro. And you can see here it's been edited, and that's where we were working with it just a minute ago. And I didn't make any changes to the forward and reverse trims. That's why they're still at 0. So it's from the file stored on my computer. So that's one way that you can quickly use DecoderPro to calculate these speed tables and then entering them by hand. Personally, I think it's worth getting the interface, not to have to do all the work by hand. Well, that's a wrap for today's video. Go ahead and get DecoderPro set up on your computer. Even if you don't have a user interface for it, you can still set up DecoderPro and manipulate the speed curves. Write down the CV settings from the CV list on your computer and then input them into your decoders by hand once you're happy with them. And that way, at least you can use the power of DecoderPro and its graphical user interface to be able to create these custom speed curves for use with your locomotives. So, have a great weekend. We'll see you here next week with another video from the DCC Guy. Bye now.